You want your life to change. You want to accomplish something that makes you proud when you speak it out loud. And, deep down that the gap between who you are and who you can become is not intelligence. It's not luck. It's not connections. It's consistency. That simple, frustrating, unsexy, unglamorous act of showing up every single day. When nothing is instant, nothing is guaranteed, and nobody is clapping for you. People romanticize change. They romanticize success. They fantasize about the moment they make it, but they almost never romanticize the grind. They don't romanticize waking up early when nobody forces them to, reading books while everyone else is lost in distraction, building habits while their friends chase instant pleasure. Napoleon Hill said, action is the real measure of intelligence. Not ideas, not intentions, not what you say you'll do. Action. Daily action. Consistent action. The boring stuff that compounds over time. And that's the catch. Consistency is boring when there's no feedback. At first, you don't see results. At first, nobody notices. At first, you question yourself. You question whether it's worth it. You question whether you're capable. But the people who win, they don't wait for motivation. They don't wait for signs. They don't wait for permission. They force themselves to build habits before results arrive. They force themselves to behave like the person they want to become, not wait for the world to validate them. Everybody wants transformation without discipline. They want confidence without competence. They want success without sacrifice. But the truth is, success is a reward for developing the discipline that most people refuse to adopt. The ones who win long term aren't the smartest. They're the most consistent. They're the ones who do it when they're excited. And they do it when they're tired. They do it when it's working, and they do it when it isn't. They don't chase feelings, they chase outcomes. Because discipline doesn't care about your mood. Success doesn't care about your excuses. The market doesn't care about how you feel today. Your life is shaped by the habits you repeatedly perform, not the goals you occasionally dream about. You can talk about what you want all day long, but life responds to what you do every day. You are either designing your future by choice or destroying it by neglect. Force yourself to read when you'd rather scroll. Force yourself to hustle when you'd rather sleep. Force yourself to stay focused when distractions pull at your attention. Force yourself to stick to the plan even when you're not seeing results yet. Because the consistency you build today becomes the results you experience tomorrow. It's slow at first, but it compounds with interest. You stack skills, you stack knowledge, you stack confidence, and ultimately you stack victories. And what happens next is the magic part. When you prove to yourself that you can stay disciplined, everything else falls into place. Your mind becomes sharper. Your decisions become clearer. Your confidence rises because you finally trust yourself. You stop negotiating with your weaknesses. You stop apologizing for wanting something bigger. You stop consuming life and start producing it. You stop being a spectator and become a competitor. People who struggle to stay consistent often think something is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong with you. You just haven't trained the muscle yet. Discipline is a skill, not a personality trait. Consistency is a practice, not a gift. You aren't born with it, you build it. And if you build it long enough, life bends in your favor. You start attracting the opportunities that seemed out of reach. You start executing the ideas you used to only fantasize about. You start outgrowing the version of you who waited for things to happen, and you step into the version who makes things happen. Most people will give up before the breakthrough. They stop right before it. Compounds. They quit when they're bored, when they're uncertain, when they're insecure, and they tell themselves a story that makes quitting feel logical instead of admitting it was emotional. But there's a small percentage that doesn't quit. They grind through the obscurity, through the confusion, through the insecurity, through the silence. They don't stop because progress wasn't obvious. They kept going until it became obvious. That's who you want to become. Not the person who shines, but the person who earns it. Not the person who gets lucky, but the person whose work rate makes luck irrelevant. You don't need certainty. You need discipline. You don't need motivation. You need consistency. You don't need more time. You need better habits. Start where you are. Use what you have. Do what you can. But whatever you do, don't quit just because it's boring. The boring part is where champions are made. The boring part is where the compounding happens. The boring part is where you build a life that you don't have to escape from. Force yourself to be consistent. Force yourself to do the work. Force yourself to shut down distractions. Not because it's easy, not because it's exciting, but because everything you want is on the other side of discipline. And when you finally develop it, when you finally master it, when you finally live it daily, that's where everything starts falling into place. Consistency transforms potential into predictable results, even when motivation is absent. Because potential by itself is nothing more than unused energy, unrealized capability, and wishful thinking that never materializes. unless it's converted into daily behavior that moves you forward in measurable increments, no matter how small or unimpressive those increments seem at the beginning. Most people convince themselves that they need to feel inspired before they act, that they need a rush of motivation, a perfect environment, or emotional clarity before they can start working toward their goals. But the truth is that motivation is unreliable, inconsistent, and emotionally unstable, and waiting for. It is the fastest way to waste years of your life while convincing yourself you're doing something meaningful. Consistency is different because it ignores feeling and focuses on execution. It does ask whether you're tired, distracted, frustrated, or uncertain. It simply requires action. And the more you repeat that action, the more natural it becomes until it's part of your identity rather than something you occasionally force your mind to do. Potential is seductive because it allows you to imagine yourself succeeding with that. Paying the price, it lets you fantasize about outcomes without committing to the grind. It tricks you into believing that because you're capable of doing something someday, you're actually making progress today. But consistency strips away that illusion by grounding everything in measurable behavior. It doesn't care about what you could do. It only cares about what you actually did, what you repeated, what you stuck with long enough to improve. There are countless people with talent, intelligence, creativity, and ambition, yet only a fraction of them ever convert the raw material into something tangible because they mistake capability for certainty. They assume that being gifted automatically translates into winning. And they learn the hard way that the world pays for performance, not possibility. Consistency makes success predictable because it converts every day into a small investment, a deposit into your future. Results a compounding effect that doesn't ask for brilliance but rewards repetition, refinement, and resilience. You don't need to be exceptional every day. You don't need to be the best at what you do from the start. You don't need to make giant leaps. You just need to show up repeatedly and just learn and improve incrementally, because small improvements stacked daily create an advantage so massive that outsiders mistake it for natural talent. What they don't see is the daily practice, the discipline, the thousands of repetitions that shaped the outcome long before anyone cared about the outcome. They don't see the days when you didn't feel like doing the work, the days when you pushed through resistance without applause, the days when you questioned whether your effort mattered at all. Motivation makes you feel like working, while consistency makes you work regardless of how you feel. And the difference between those two mentalities determines who builds momentum and who remains stuck in stagnation. When you act only when motivated, you create sporadic results. You produce bursts of progress followed by long gaps of inactivity, and your confidence collapses because you never build rhythm or identity around your effort. But when you act consistently, you build a self-image rooted in discipline. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to believe that you follow through that. You don't rely on emotional highs to do the things that matter, and that belief becomes a psychological advantage that influences every area of your life. Consistency creates confidence because it gives you evidence. And evidence is far more powerful than positive thinking or motivational speeches because it's rooted in reality rather than imagination. People overestimate what they can accomplish in a burst of passion and underestimate what they can accomplish when they commit to a system and repeat it every day. And the reason is simple. Passion is temporary. Systems are sustainable. And long-term success is built on sustainability, not intensity. It's not the person who trains the hardest for 1 week who wins. It's the person who trains consistently for months, even if many of those days feel unimpressive, average, or annoying. Winning is rarely dramatic in the moment. It's usually the accumulation of hundreds of unremarkable days where the only metric that mattered was showing up, doing the work, and improving 1% at a time. When you rely on motivation, you give power to your feelings, which means you will work hard. Only when life feels convenient, comfortable, or exciting, and you will quit when challenges arise, when fatigue sets in, or when results are delayed. But when you commit to consistency, you take power away from emotion and give it to structure, discipline, and responsibility. This shift creates freedom because freedom is created not by doing whatever you feel like doing, but by building habits that eliminate the need for decision-making, negotiation, or emotional justification. You reduce friction. You reduce hesitation. You reduce self-sabotage because the behavior becomes automatic rather than optional. Consistency also separates those who are serious about success from those who simply wish for it, because the moment you commit to showing up daily, you expose how often you've used excuses to protect your comfort, how often you've justified your lack of action by blaming circumstances, timing, or resource limitations. And once you recognize this pattern, you can either defend it or destroy it. Most people defend it because comfort is easier than growth. Excuses are easier than responsibility, and dreams are easier than discipline. But the minority chooses consistency because they're tired of imagining their potential instead of living it. tired of planning instead of producing, tired of waiting for the perfect moment instead of building it. Predictable results don't come from unpredictable behavior. They come from predictable habits, and that's what consistency creates. Reliability, structure, rhythm, progress you can track, evaluate, and optimize. You don't hope for improvement. You engineer it, you measure it, you repeat it, and you refine it. You stop chasing flashes of inspiration and start building foundations that support long-term achievement, because success isn't the consequence of what you do occasionally. It's the consequence of what you commit to relentlessly, regardless of whether anyone sees it, celebrates it, or rewards it today. Discipline requires forcing yourself into habits before results or validation show up, because the first phase of any meaningful pursuit is invisible, unrewarded, and often unrewarding, and most people underestimate how mentally difficult it is to commit to a routine when there is absolutely no proof that what you're doing is work, no applause, no recognition, and no immediate payoff to make you feel like the sacrifice is worth it. In the beginning, habits don't feel productive. They feel inconvenient, they feel slow, they feel like obstacles to comfort rather than pathways to achievement, and that is why so many people quit early. Not because they lack intelligence or ambition, but because they are not emotional, prepared to endure the emptiness of effort that doesn't produce instant gratification. Discipline demands that you move anyway, that you show up anyway, that you execute the behaviors you promised yourself you would. Execute without checking every 5 seconds to see whether the world appreciates you or whether success is on its way. The truth about habits is that they are built long before they feel meaningful. And the hardest part of building them is not learning what to do, but practicing it so consistently that it becomes automatic, internalized, and eventually ritualized into your identity. People love talking about routines, morning rituals, productivity hacks, and optimized workflows. But almost no one wants to endure the frustrating period where you have to force yourself to do the work when you still prefer the old pattern, when your brain fights change, when everything in you wants to sink back into comfort because it's familiar. Discipline is not the glamorous part of success. It is the part where you wrestle with your own impulses, where you override your desire for comfort, and where you prove to yourself that you are capable of acting independently of your mood or environment. There's a misconception that discipline is easy once you understand its value. But knowing the value of discipline doesn't make doing it easier, because knowledge does not override emotion, and emotion is the primary barrier standing between people and consistency. When results aren't visible, the brain will push you toward activities that provide quicker rewards, easier dopamine, and less discomfort. And unless you consciously resist that pull, you will abandon a long-term strategy for short-term pleasure without realizing that you just sabotaged the very outcome you claim you want. Discipline is the process of telling yourself no when every part of you wants to say yes to distraction, laziness, and excuses. And this psychological confrontation is exhausting because it is repetitive, daily, and often lonely. People talk about success like it's the moment they achieve a result. But success actually begins long before results exist. It begins when you construct a foundation of habits that guarantees progress even when feelings fluctuate. And that foundation is always built in the dark. If you only work when the surface level rewards are visible, you are not disciplined. You are motivated. Motivation has a short lifespan because it depends on emotional spikes that fade when difficulties arise. Discipline is about execution without evidence, continuing without applause, and believing in the principle that repetition leads to mastery, even when mastery feels distant or impossible. That is why many individuals with talent never achieve excellence, while individuals with average ability surpass them, because discipline is a multiplier that compensates for limitations by converting effort into skill and skill into results over time. When you develop habits before validation, you develop intrinsic strength because your behavior becomes independent of external pressure or encouragement. And this independence is one of the most powerful assets in personal and professional growth. People who need validation to act are inconsistent because the environment controls their output. But people who act without validation are dangerous because nothing can stop them when rewards finally arrive. The early stages of habit formation feel lonely because the world doesn't recognize progress at micro levels. The world only recognizes success once it is obvious, profitable, or impressive, and by that point, the habits have already been built through an accumulation of private decisions that lacked recognition. Discipline forces you to confront your impatience. And impatience is one of the most destructive traits because it convinces you that slow progress equals no progress, that lack of results equals lack of potential, and that effort without reward equals failure, which leads people to quit right before compounding begins. Habits don't reward you immediately, but they shape your identity immediately. They shift you from someone who wants to be great to someone who behaves like a person who achieved excellence. even if the world doesn't see you that way yet. This identity shift is subtle but incredibly powerful. Because once you begin to identify as someone who follows through, quitting becomes inconsistent with who you are, not just what you do. Building habits before results forces you to redefine success, not as achievement, but as daily execution. Not as praise, but as personal accountability. Not as recognition, but as mastery of self. If you condition your brain to require validation before you act, you will live in a constant state of insecurity because you will outsource confidence to external forces instead of developing it internally. But when you train yourself to act without validation, you build confidence because you accumulate proof that you can. Do what you say you will do even when no one is watching, and that self-trust becomes a competitive advantage in area of life. Discipline in the early stages is difficult because it demands that you sacrifice comfort without proof that the sacrifice is necessary. But the irony is that the proof only appears after the sacrifice, not before it. People who wait for results before committing always fall behind because results are delayed by nature. And discipline is required to bridge the gap between action and outcome. Most things worth achieving require more time, more repetitions, and more resilience than you expect at the beginning. And this expectation gap destroys morale unless you accept that the first phase is supposed to feel unrewarding, slow, and uncertain. Success is built by people who can withstand the emotional discomfort of acting without reward because they understand that habits are the infrastructure of achievement. And that infrastructure must be constructed long before it supports anything visible. The world celebrates winners. But winners are created in the phase where nothing is celebrated, nothing is obvious, and nothing is guaranteed in that. Uncomfortable phases where discipline either matures or collapses depending on whether you show up without needing to be seen, praised, or validated. You said small, repeated actions compound into skill, confidence, and opportunity over time because every action, no matter how small it appears in isolation, represents data, experience, and practice that accumulates beneath the surface long before it produces visible results. And this accumulation is what separates the people who slowly transform themselves from the people who stay perpetually stuck in cycles of starting and quitting. Most individuals dramatically underestimate the power of tiny actions because they are conditioned to believe that transformation must feel dramatic, intense, or revolutionary. And when their effort doesn't produce instant results or emotional excitement, they assume they are failing rather than investing in a process that rewards patience. Consistency in small actions is not glamorous because it doesn't trigger dopamine. It doesn't provide big wins. It doesn't attract attention. And it doesn't satisfy the ego's desire for rapid affirmation. But it builds something far more valuable than momentary highs. It builds capability. And capability compounds like interest. Small actions convert knowledge into application. Application into competence. And competence into confidence. Because confidence is not built by thinking positively or telling yourself you are capable, but by repeatedly doing difficult things until your brain internalizes proof that you can handle them. People think confidence precedes action, but in reality, confidence emerges from repetition. You earn it by enduring discomfort, making mistakes, learning, adapting, and deciding to keep going rather than quitting when something feels unfamiliar or intimidating. Every repetition shortens the learning curve, reduces hesitation, and increases efficiency. And these micro improvements add up over weeks, months, and years to create a noticeable gap between those who practice consistently and those who work sporadically. The small actions that feel insignificant today are planting seeds for future skill, future execution, and future results. And the person you become is shaped not by a handful of major efforts, but by thousands of small ones performed across time. The reason compounding is often misunderstood is because its effects are delayed. And humans are notoriously impatient with anything that does not provide immediate payoff. But mastery requires an investment period where the majority of progress is invisible. A beginner who practices a skill for 20 minutes a day might not feel significantly better after a week, but after 6 months, there is a qualitative difference in precision, speed, and performance that outsiders will incorrectly attribute to talent rather than to unremarkable daily practice. People are impressed by outcomes, but uninterested in processes. Yet outcomes are merely the mathematical sum of small, boring, continuous behaviors repeated long enough to generate momentum. The compounding effect eventually accelerates progress to a point where the same effort produces exponentially greater results than before. And this acceleration feels sudden only to those who didn't witness the foundation. Small actions are also powerful because they maintain sustainability. And sustainability is the core requirement for long-term achievement. Big bursts of effort are emotionally satisfying but mentally draining, and they are nearly impossible to sustain without burnout. But small, repeatable actions allow you to operate at a pace that doesn't destroy your energy or enthusiasm. The people who master skills, build businesses, or transform their bodies do not rely on occasional intensity, but on consistent repetition. Because the body and mind adapt to what they repeatedly experience. Skills are not memorized, they are automated, and automation happens through repeated exposure. What feels difficult today becomes effortless tomorrow because the neural pathways that govern performance are strengthened with every repetition. And the ease that others perceive as natural ability is often just the result of accumulated practice. Opportunity is also a byproduct of compounding because as you refine skills and build confidence, you become capable of capitalizing on possibilities that would have overwhelmed or intimidated an earlier version of you. Opportunities rarely appear for unprepared individuals, and when they do, those individuals lack the competence or courage to seize them, which is why so many people mistakenly believe luck determines success. Luck matters, but without skill and confidence, luck is wasted, ignored, or sabotaged. The people who seem lucky are often just prepared. They spent months or years building habits, competence, and reputation slowly, quietly, without applause. And when a door finally opened, they were able to walk through it without hesitation. Preparation creates leverage, and leverage allows small actions to translate into disproportionate outcomes. Most people look for massive breakthroughs, thinking that progress requires dramatic change, but massive breakthroughs are simply the visible tipping point of compounding, the point at which accumulated consistent effort becomes undeniable. Before that moment, there is often stagnation, doubt, boredom, and uncertainty, which is why so few individuals stick with anything long enough to reach that threshold. They underestimate the time required, overestimate their tolerance for delayed gratification, and abandon the process before compounding has an opportunity to reward them. But those who persist learn something that changes the way they approach every challenge. Small wins build momentum, and momentum is a powerful psychological force. Each tiny win strengthens belief, reduces resistance, and increases commitment, creating a self-reinforcing cycle in which discipline produces progress, progress produces confidence, and confidence produces even more discipline. There is also a subtle but profound shift in identity that occurs through repeated small actions. Because identity is not formed through intention, it is formed through behavior. When you practice something daily, even briefly, you begin to see yourself as someone who prioritizes growth, someone who follows through, someone who does the work, whether or not it feels exciting. This identity shift changes how you think, how you choose, how you respond to challenges, and how you approach the future. You begin to expect more from yourself, not because of motivational rhetoric, but because your behavior provides evidence of who you're becoming. The identity that is built through repetition is resilient because it is anchored in experience rather than aspiration. Small actions compound not only because they improve skill, but because they reshape habits, mindset, and emotional tolerance. They teach you how to persist without reward, how to make progress without perfection, and how to handle discomfort without quitting. Repetition normalizes discomfort, and when discomfort is normalized, growth becomes possible. Most people fail, not because they lack potential, but because they avoid discomfort. And avoidance eliminates the possibility of compounding. People assume they need more motivation, more clarity, or more time, but what they actually need is a willingness to do something small today without demanding immediate validation. The most extraordinary transformations emerge from ordinary actions repeated with discipline. And those who embrace this principle unlock a level of growth that feels inevitable to everyone except the person who spent years laying the groundwork with humble, unremarkable effort. The breakthrough is earned by those who persist through boredom, doubt, and invisibility, because the path to anything meaningful is littered with long stretches where progress is not obvious, results are not visible, and the emotional payoff is non-existent. And most people underestimate how psychologically demanding it is to keep pushing forward in that phase without collapsing under frustration or discouragement. People imagine success as a series of exciting wins, breakthroughs, and affirmations, but the reality is that the journey is often slow, repetitive, and mentally draining, filled with days that feel identical, unproductive, or pointless. And it is in those uneventful stretches where the majority of individuals quit because they mistake monotony for failure. Boredom becomes a barrier not because the work itself is impossible, but because the lack of novelty exposes a deeper truth. Success is not driven by excitement. It is driven by endurance, and endurance is built in environments where nothing feels stimulating or rewarding. Doubt becomes a companion. During these periods, a doubt is often more dangerous than difficulty because it attacks the belief system that sustains action. You begin to wonder whether your effort matters, whether you're capable, whether you're wasting time while others sprint ahead, and whether the vision you're chasing is realistic or just a fantasy you cling to in order to feel purposeful. Doubt doesn't announce itself loudly. It creeps in quietly, in moments of fatigue, distraction, comparison, frustration, and erodes your conviction piece by piece until giving up feels rational rather than emotional. This is why perseverance isn't simply a matter of strength, but a matter of strategy, because you must learn how to manage your psychology. When your brain tries to convince you to retreat into safety and abandon the uncomfortable pursuit of something larger, invisibility is another hurdle, and it is brutal because humans are wired to seek validation, recognition, and feedback. And when you spend months or years working quietly without being acknowledged, it becomes tempting to believe that obscurity equals insignificance. But every meaningful pursuit requires a season of invisibility, because mastery is developed in private long before it is revealed in public. And the early stages of skill building, habit formation, and identity transformation are not glamorous enough to attract attention. You are doing work that no one sees, sacrificing things no one appreciates, and building foundations that no one values until they are complete. And many people collapse under this emotional weight because they crave external confirmation that they are on the right path, even though that confirmation only arrives after the path has already been walked. The breakthrough doesn't happen because someone suddenly becomes more talented or intelligent. It happens because they stayed long enough in the trenches while others abandoned their mission. What people call a breakthrough is often just the delayed public recognition of private consistency, the moment when accumulated effort hits a tipping point. It becomes visible to outsiders who assume it happened overnight. The truth is that breakthroughs are really sudden. They are the accumulated result of thousands of actions that nobody noticed, practiced in silence, without applause, without encouragement, and often without certainty. Persistence through boredom is essential because boredom is the stage before mastery, when repetition feels aimless but is actually solidifying neural pathways, refining skills, and building automaticity that will eventually separate the committed from the casual. The phase of doubt is equally important because it forces you to confront your insecurities, question your assumptions, and build emotional resilience instead of relying on external reassurance. Doubt tests whether your vision is strong enough to withstand adversity, whether your identity is aligned with your ambition, and whether you have the psychological stamina to continue when logic tells you to quit. People glorify confidence, but confidence is often the reward for surviving doubt rather than the starting point. And those who endure uncertainty become more capable of navigating the unpredictable realities of growth, business, personal development, or creative pursuit. Invisibility transforms into advantage because the work you do without attention is pure, uncorrupted by the pressure of performance or public perception. You are free to experiment, fail, iterate, and refine without fear of judgment. And this freedom creates space for authentic development. When the spotlight eventually arrives, the person who emerges is not raw, insecure, or unprepared, but tested, refined, and battle-hardened by the invisible journey. Meanwhile, those who crave instant recognition often chase attention prematurely, seeking praise before they have earned competence. And they collapse under scrutiny because they lack the substance that only comes from time spent in obscurity. Persistence during these phases is rare because it contradicts human preference for novelty, ease, social approval, and fast results. Most people approach goals with the expectation of linear progress. Effort should lead to results. Results should lead to validation. Validation should lead to motivation. But meaningful achievement is nonlinear, unpredictable, and uneven, and the ability to continue without measurable progress is what creates separation. The breakthrough is earned not because someone works once in a while, but because they work when it is tedious, unexciting, discouraging, and isolating. And this type of work ethic builds momentum that eventually compounds into visible outcomes. There is a moment in every pursuit when the gap between input and output feels too wide, when you give more than you receive, when the cost outweighs the reward. And this moment is where most people abandon the process because they misinterpret delayed results as permanent failure. But those who push past this threshold understand that the lag between effort and reward is not a sign of futility, but a natural delay built into every complex process, whether it's building a business, mastering a skill, transforming the body, or elevating the mind. Persistence is not glamorous. It is repetitive, disciplined, uncelebrated work that compounds imperceptibly until it reaches critical mass. The breakthrough is not a miracle. It is an inevitability for those who refuse to quit during the invisible stages. It arrives after boredom has sharpened focus, after doubt has forged emotional strength, after invisibility has allowed mastery to mature, and after time has magnified the effects of consistent effort to a point where results become undeniable. People call it luck, timing, or natural ability because they didn't witness the seasons of tedium, insecurity, and isolation that preceded it. But those who lived through those seasons understand that the breakthrough wasn't magic. It was earned by the simple, difficult act of continuing when others chose to stop.